Thank you, and really thank you, Dustin, for the kind introduction. It's really probably the best introduction I've ever gotten. So if my staff can take notes, let's put that in my bio. I didn't even realize I did have that stuff. It's really an honor and a privilege for me to be here today. I want to thank Heather and the organizers of National Clean Energy Week for inviting me to speak here today. And I still think it's surreal, and I'm humbled that I get to share a program with Senator Ayotte, who I so greatly respect and admire. So it genuinely is an honor for me to be here today to have this opportunity. Before I get into what I'd like to discuss, I have to give the usual disclaimers. The views I express here are my own opinions and don't necessarily reflect those of my fellow commissioners or FERC staff. As you may also be aware, FERC's ex parte rules are such that I cannot discuss any contested proceedings before us. So had to get that out of the way. Moving on to what I would like to speak about today. I joined the commission, as Dustin mentioned, last August, and to say the past 13 months have been busy would be a huge understatement. Now, a little bit of context: when former Pennsylvania PUC Chairman Rob Powelson and I were confirmed to the commission last August, the commission had gotten down to just one member, Commissioner Cheryl LaFleur, and we had lost a quorum for a period of about 7 months. And so when Commissioner Powelson and I got through the process, we had finally restored the quorum and gotten FERC back to its minimum 3 members that it needed to run a quorum. We had a substantial backlog in casework that had accrued during the time that quorum was lost. And I got thrust into the unfortunate situation where I had to serve temporarily as chairman. I had been a broke Senate staffer, so my confirmation process was much easier than the chairman's, who had been a very successful attorney. And so got into the job, started working with the excellent staff at the agency, and started piling through and working through the accrued backlog. And one of my proudest achievements is that we were able to successfully navigate that backlog in a much shorter time frame than all of us had initially anticipated. Finally, in December, we were joined by Commissioners Rich Glick and the chairman, Kevin McIntyre, and hallelujah, FERC was back to a full complement of 5, which I think is really important because the commission does speak loudest when it speaks with one voice and when it has a full complement of commissioners. And right away, Chairman McIntyre set forth an ambitious agenda for all of us to work together to pursue. At his very first meeting, he announced that we would be reviewing our 1999 certificate policy statement and finding ways to improve our permitting process. We've got major issues regarding transmission and ROEs and incentives for transmission and what impact that may have on the increased deployment of renewables. The chairman has announced that he would like to examine revisiting our regs regarding PURPA, which was passed in the late 1970s, and we've heard calls for PURPA modernization. Dustin mentioned the great work we did on LNG to make sure that the U.S. is in a position to take advantage of the next global opportunity in LNG exports. We've seen the advantages in this country with a great reduction in carbon emissions that has resulted from the increased deployment of gas and renewables. And I think the opportunity to export clean U.S. LNG around the world has the capacity to impact global emissions as well. Cybersecurity continues to be at the forefront of the commission, and I will speak later to the DOE notice of proposed rulemaking on grid resilience that we also have had to contend with in the past year. So it's been an eventful first year, but we were feeling good. We had our full 5, and we were rolling through the summer. And then in August, Commissioner Powelson had a great opportunity for his family and departed the commission, and we're back now down to 4 commissioners with a number of complex issues ahead of us. But I want to be clear, I don't think that the fact that there's going to be 4 of us means that we're going to lock up 2-2 on a partisan divide. The issues before us are are richly substantive and technical. They're not political, and I think all of you in the room should have confidence that my colleagues and I will be able to work together to address these difficult issues while we await our fifth colleague to join us. Although I will note that the Fair Rates Act that Senator Markey was pushing was included in WRDA, and should that be signed into law, that will address the 2-2 situation. Now, turning specifically to the topic that's brought us together here this morning, the progress that we've seen by clean energy over the last 15 years has been nothing short of an American success story. In fact, I could spend the entire presentation running through statistics about the incredible advancements clean energy technology has made all across the country. But what I'd like to do instead is give you my view on what the future of clean energy looks like and the role that FERC will play in shaping that future. To understand where the future of clean energy technologies may take us, we should first examine the motivating factors behind their rapid growth. While environmental concerns have certainly played a role in the progression of clean energy technologies, moving forward, I do not think that they will be the sole driving force or even the primary motivator. Instead, I think the continued proliferation of clean energy is currently and will continue to be driven by a combination of three things: the declining cost of renewables, open and competitive energy markets, and growing customer demand for clean energy. More and more, private capital is understanding that clean energy just makes good business sense. Let me explain. First, the capital costs of renewables are dropping rapidly. Bloomberg New Energy Finance estimates that the cost of onshore wind and solar PV fell 18% in the first half of 2018 alone. 18%. But those declines aren't just words on a page. They have real-world impacts. For instance, in 2017, Xcel held an open solicitation for new resources and received more than 250 offers for wind and solar, with median offers of $18 and $29 per megawatt hour, respectively. These numbers become even more noteworthy once you take into consideration that they represent contracts starting in 2023. Why is that significant? That is after the production tax credit has expired. To put these figures in perspective, the average locational marginal price of energy for 2017 in the Mid-Continent ISO, which covers roughly the middle region of the United States, was $29 a megawatt hour. This means that we are on the cusp of a future where renewables can compete on cost and make money in the open market, even without subsidies. Second, from an expenditure perspective, having zero fuel costs removes a significant amount of risk from an operator's balance sheet. It also means that renewable energy operators reap considerable profits during times of energy scarcity, such as the polar vortex or last winter's bomb cyclone. Finally, renewables satisfy a growing market need across all customer groups for carbon-free generation. City and municipal governments are demanding increased renewables on behalf of their constituents, with some, like the city of San Diego, setting a lofty goal of being 100% renewable by 2035. But it's not just cities and municipalities. Individual residential consumers are increasingly opting for carbon-free electricity wherever it's cost competitive as well. And as part of their commitment to corporate sustainability, 2/3 of Fortune 100 companies are procuring renewable energy to meet their goals. What's more, there's a good possibility that the business case for renewable energy could become even more compelling in the years ahead as electricity storage technologies mature. Remember that Xcel solicitation I mentioned earlier? There were also bids for wind and solar co-located with battery storage. Those bids had a median offer of $21 and $36 a megawatt hour, respectively. That's only a $3 and $7 per megawatt hour premium over conventional wind and solar, which is just phenomenal. So as we continue to see the development of an impressive business case by renewable energy technologies, the Commission is left to consider the following. What is FERC's role in facilitating the coming transition in America's generation mix? In my view, our role is simple. First, we must ensure that the grid remains reliable and resilient. Second, we should work to ensure that market rules provide a level playing field for all resources. Over the past decade, the Commission has made major progress on both of these goals, and it's been a personal priority of mine since coming on board to continue this progress. We've made good strides already. For example, the Commission has issued several rulemakings to ensure that all new generators, including renewables, provide essential reliability services such as voltage support and frequency response. In addition, I'm very proud to say we recently issued Order Number 841, which required regional market operators to facilitate the participation of energy storage. This was something that was personally significant to me. Senators Markey and Whitehouse had really stressed in advance of my confirmation that this be something that the Commission take immediate action upon and Commissioner Powelson getting seated, and I'm very proud that we were able to get that out in due course. We've also approved a variety of proposals from various RTOs and ISOs to enhance integration of renewable energy into their markets, allowing renewables to compete on even footing with traditional generators. But despite this important progress, there's been increasing concern over the past several years about tension between FERC's goal of economically efficient electricity markets and other policy objectives at the federal, state, and local levels. From my viewpoint, part of that concern arises from the fact that the benefits of the ongoing transformation of our energy sector have not been uniformly experienced across the country. So for me, this is very personal. As was mentioned in the introduction, I grew up in Kentucky. I worked for Senator McConnell for almost a decade, and I saw firsthand the genuinely devastating impact that the retirement of coal-fired generation can have in communities in Kentucky. In parts of Appalachia, you have a situation where families are dependent on the jobs that come from the power plants and the mines that feed them. And when those plants shut down and the mines that supply them shut down and the indirect jobs associated with those shut down, there are really not options available to people in these communities. Oftentimes, there's not a Walmart or a Burger King for 30 miles, and the only asset that people in these communities have is their homes, and their homes lose all value because no one wants to move to an area without hope for economic prosperity. And it's not just unique to Kentucky. I know Secretary Zinke is slated to speak here shortly, and Senator Daines will be speaking here later today. Senator Daines was kind enough to host myself and Senator Ayotte in Montana earlier this spring, and he took me out to Colstrip, Montana. I was the first FERC commissioner to ever visit Colstrip. And we visited the plant and the mine there, and then we had a town hall forum in which we discussed some of the challenges that this transition in energy is having in communities like Colstrip. And what I was so touched by was at the conclusion of the town hall, Senator Daines, Congressman Gianforte, and others, they had to move on to the next event. I lingered a little bit, and I was the last to leave. And there were two police officers in the room who were simply there to provide security for the event. And they approached me as I was leaving, and they said, "Hey, look, we don't pretend to understand the complexities of the energy policy that you're discussing. We just want you to know that we appreciate that somebody in Washington is thinking about communities like ours and what would happen if these jobs went away." And what they told me is that if the plants go away, the community goes away. And look, I'd be lying if I didn't say that really touched me. But while I've often expressed my sensitivity to the concerns voiced by these communities, My job at FERC, we at the Commission, we are bound to work within the constraints of our jurisdictional authority, which does not allow us to take those types of considerations into account. When Secretary Perry sent us a proposed rulemaking last fall that would have provided payments to most coal and nuclear generators, I joined with my colleagues in finding that the proposal was not legally justified. Again, the considerations I had for coal country just don't play a role in our decision-making, in our record. And I want to be clear, it wasn't just my sympathy for these coal communities that caused this difficult decision. I'm also concerned about the future of nuclear power. I believe climate change is happening. I believe it's man-made, and I believe we need to take steps to mitigate emissions. And I think nuclear power, as our single greatest source of carbon-free baseload generation, is important to that. And I'm worried about what even a slight uptick in the retirement of nuclear units may have on our ability to reduce global emissions. But again, this is just not something that factors into our decision making. We had to evaluate the proposal based on the record before us, and my colleagues and I unanimously agreed that the proposal was not legally justifiable. Although the Commission ultimately found that it didn't pass legal muster, my colleagues and I did unanimously agree that Secretary Perry had raised an important question about the resilience of the grid. That's why, in our January order setting aside the DOE proposal, we established a new proceeding to evaluate that question further. As part of that proceeding, we've solicited comments from the RTOs, ISOs, and other interested stakeholders on the question of whether the grid is sufficiently resilient, and if not, how resilience could be improved. We are currently evaluating the extensive comments received in the docket and discussing what next steps, if any, might be appropriate. Let me again be clear on this point. Whatever changes may come out of that effort will have to be legally justified based on the record before us and implemented in a fuel-neutral way. Now, before closing, I want to briefly address another issue that's continued to garner a great deal of interest: the tension resulting from the interaction between state policies and RTO and ISO markets. Many stakeholders are concerned about whether state subsidies for certain types of generators will impact the efficient functioning of wholesale electricity markets. On this particular issue, I can't speak too specifically because we have several pending cases before us. But I will say this: I'm a conservative. I believe strongly in states' rights. That's why I think it's critical that we ensure that whatever action FERC takes to address state policies strikes an appropriate balance between allowing states to pursue their legitimate policy interests while maintaining just and reasonable prices in the wholesale market. On that note, I want to thank you all again for the opportunity to be here with you and share my views. I'd also like to take a moment to express my gratitude for the role that each of you plays in this space and the good work that you do each day. I look forward to continuing this important dialogue as our energy landscape continues to evolve. Thank you.